Hey everyone, my name is Vivek. I'm really excited about sharing one of my favorite TED Talks. It's called Everything You Know About Addiction is Wrong. And this TED Talk shattered so many different ideas that I thought I knew about addiction and just generally how people connected to one another, which I'll go into as I review the TED Talk. So this TED Talk had 6 major takeaways that I found. So the first one was that, as the title said, everything we know about addiction is wrong. And he really describes 3 main reasons why that's the case. First off, basically a lot of the logic behind why we get addicted to drugs and alcohol were based on some experiments done about 100 years ago that were, what it seems like, pretty poorly designed. So poorly designed experiments led to misunderstood reasons for why we get addicted. The second reason why what we know is wrong is related to what we actually see in daily life. So humans often take heroin or morphine actually when we have an accident and we're in the hospital and we have to have some sort of surgery and so forth. And people don't get addicted to those substances usually then. So basically, a lot of the experiments that we were shown that if you take drugs, you're automatically going to get addicted to something. In real life, it doesn't play out. And lastly, when war vets came back from the Vietnam War, many of them, while they were in Vietnam, were addicted to heroin. And while we all thought that they would come back and we'd have this major addiction issue with our vets, that actually wasn't the case. Most of them came back, didn't have to go to rehab, and weren't addicted. So in real life, we found these experiments that we based much of our assumptions on addiction in about 100 years ago were actually incorrect. So the second major takeaway I got from the video was that addiction actually should be called bonding. And the reason for that is that humans, like our most recent ancestors and many other species before us, are social beings. We connect with one another, and that's why relationships, family, larger communities are so important to most humans. But for folks that are addicted to certain things, they oftentimes use those things to be connected because they are feeling isolated, they're feeling alone. So they have to rely on substances and other things to have that connection that's missing in their life. And he really describes that using some science, and it's very interesting to hear that point. The third point, which was actually kind of the converse of the second, was that the reason that most of us don't get addicted to drugs and alcohol is because we have solid relationships and we have solid purposes in our lives that keeps us connected and driven towards the future. And for the folks that do, like I said before, they don't have those same things in place, so they oftentimes have to use drugs and alcohol as their method to escape the isolation that they feel. 4. So it's crazy, but it seems like the systems we have in place to treat addicts today perhaps is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. And the reason is that the systems we have in place oftentimes isolate these people, either by putting them in prison, putting them in these rehab programs, and just generally shunning them from society instead of welcoming them. And so what ends up happening is when they finish these programs and they want to re-enter society, they oftentimes do so alone. And in that time where they're feeling alone, they have to go back to these substances to find companionship. 5. So we actually have a system out in the real world that is working, and that's in Portugal. So Portugal, I think in the early 2000s, Hari said, had a major issue with heroin addiction. I think about 1% of their population was addicted to heroin. And as he explained, they were trying to figure out how to resolve this issue. And in doing so, they decided to decriminalize all substances. And pretty quickly, addiction to heroin dropped by 50%. Pretty amazing. And since then, they've done a lot of programs to help bring addicts back into society again, to reconnect them with their family and friends, to help them get jobs. And they have not changed the program since because the results have been so good. And 6, and probably most powerful, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's community. And as he mentioned earlier on in the talk, as I pointed out, it's about connecting with one another. That's what helps us get out of addiction. It's not about shunning people. It's not about just being sober. It's about helping people find bonds beyond these substances. Otherwise, they will be bonded to a substance. I love this video for a bunch of reasons. It goes into mental wellness issues. It talks about community. And as an American, I think it's super important. As you may be aware or may not be aware, life expectancy for white males in the US has actually gone down. It's not a one-year thing. It's something that's been occurring since 2014. And there's a bunch of main drivers for this. Heroin addiction, alcoholism, and mass shootings are the main reasons for this decline. And if you were to ask yourself, why would anyone happy or normal do this to themselves? And the reason is probably because they're lonely. They're isolated, they feel alone, and they're trying to find bonding with something beyond themselves. So I've really thought about this issue quite a bit because I'm trying to understand why people would go to these measures. And I think I've narrowed it down to 2 main culprits. One being capitalism and second being mental wellness programs. So first off, capitalism. Capitalism has a super strong focus on shareholder value. And what that boils down to meaning is every quarter and every year, companies having to drive to make more money, more profit. This often causes normal employees to have to hit targets that are extremely unusual so that they can match shareholder expectations. And in doing so, they oftentimes spend less time with their friends, their kids, their parents, and anyone else that's important to them. So once again, becoming more and more isolated. And actually, Hari talks about this in his video. He talks about a decline in the number of close relationships that people have been having since the 1950s. And at the same time, an increase in the space that we live. So people trading off relationships for money and to have a life that's very focused on their professional life. And the second component of capitalism that's at play is this focus on marketing. And in doing so, we constantly make each other, make society feel like we're not enough. That the iPhone we have wasn't sufficient. That the shirts that we wear aren't good enough. That the apartment that we live in isn't good enough. And in doing so, we chase after the next thing to get. Second major cause, I believe, for this is a lack of understanding about mental wellness and having mental wellness programs being a key component of life here, especially here in America. While mental wellness and health has become more of a hot topic, say in the last 20 or so years, and especially in the last 5, prior to that, it was really not understood. And now there's a lot of science and corporations are spending a lot more time trying to understand these components. But until then, this was really not a topic well understood. And even today, there's not a lot of great tools yet being considered and used here. So I think those 2 things combined has caused this issue to be a major problem here in the US, and we're seeing it also in other parts of the world. So for me, the way I look at it is I definitely think there needs to be some major reforms to capitalism. I'm not saying we have to ditch capitalism completely, but I think there's an opportunity for a more refined form of capitalism, some actually calling it conscious capitalism. That might be an opportunity. I definitely think more research and work around meditation, seeing a professional, community, all these things are super, super important to helping people find more mental wellness and strength. And that's part of the reason why I'm actually started this channel, because I wanted to dive into these type of subjects so people better understood what they were going through is actually normal, and that there's things and communities out there that can help them. So that's my review on this amazing TED Talk. Hopefully, if you haven't watched it already, you'll check it out. I'll put a link in the description below. If you think I missed anything or I'm wrong, love to hear your feedback in the comments. Please leave a comment. And if you liked the video, definitely give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much and have a great day.